YouTube and welcome to the channel. Now then, on today's video we're going to be making this. It's the Airfix Starter Kit of a 172 Folland Gnat. Now if you're a regular, don't worry, we've not suddenly become a model making channel. There is some RC stuff in the pipeline. It's just that at the moment the weather and the time constraints and the fact that the evenings are dark, it's proved very difficult for me to get out there and make videos for you guys. But we can do this indoors. Don't need the weather. It's not weather dependent, so that's why I've been doing a few models. Thought it might make a change actually, and it'd be of interest to somebody. So we're going to be building this. It's the Folland Gnat T.1. Now this is the trainer version operated by the RAF. It originally was designed as a fighter, a dog fighter predominantly, but the RAF weren't interested in that. They bought the trainer version of it. The Indians, however, the Indian Air Force bought them and operated them with some success, I believe, in the Indo-Pakistani War, where they came up against Pakistani sabres, and apparently they did quite well, mainly because of the aircraft's diminutive size and the fact that it was so agile and manoeuvrable. It was very difficult to shoot down. So there you go. So anyway, we're going to build this today. Let's get it out of the box, see what we get, and take it from there. Right then, in the box we get some instructions, and there are decals there. Nice set of decals. These new Airfix instructions, by the way, are fantastic. They're quite concise, and they do have like the painting information as well, which colours you need to use. We have got 4 colours and a tube of poly cement. Obviously the yellow, I think the silver, a grey and a black. We've got a brush. These little brushes are great, by the way. I've also got 3 of them now. And we've also got the model kit itself. Now this thing, I'm not sure if it's a new moulding by Airfix, but it certainly looks reasonably crisp here. But we'll find out when we take it out of the bag. I've been really impressed so far with these little Airfix starter kits, because literally you can just use the contents of the box and you can make a really decent job of it. Anyway, let's have a closer look at these sprues. Right, first impression of the actual moulding itself, and it looks pretty good. There's a few parts that have got a little bit of moulding flash on them, but nothing that we can't get round, I don't suppose. Now the aircraft that we are depicting is one that flew with the RAF display team, the Yellowjacks. The Gnats would later go on to be the Red Arrows, and it was before the Red Arrows, I think there was quite a few display teams, so they decided like the Black Arrows and the Red Pelicans. And I think they decided at one time it would be cheaper, much cheaper, if they just amalgamated them into one display team, and that's how we ended up with the Red Arrows. I believe that to be correct anyway. So anyway, what I'm going to do is wash these sprues off, and first thing to do is going to paint the fuselage yellow. I've washed and dried the sprues and applied the first coat of yellow. It's definitely going to need a second coat because it's quite thin, the yellow is, but that's no problem, we've got plenty of it. I'm not going to bother painting the pilots because we haven't quite got the correct colours, so that would do me head in a little bit, that would. But what I'm going to do now is go on to paint the various bits and pieces of the cockpit black that need to be painted. Also, I've noticed that we appear to have some extra parts in the form of possibly some wing tanks, but this is the display version, so it doesn't appear to carry them, and they're not, as far as I can tell, they're not listed in instructions, so we're going to leave them out. But anyway, I'll carry on and we'll start painting the various bits and pieces black. Right then, this is where we're up to with the Gnat. Now then, I've gone ahead and I've painted all the cockpit bits and pieces black. I've also painted the little bits of the undercarriage the grey colour, and there's various bits inside the cockpit that've got to be silver and grey. The bits you can basically see in the wheel wells, etc. Now I've ran into my first problem, which is that this yellow colour, you probably can't tell actually on the video, but this yellow colour is very translucent, and I've applied I think about 5 coats up till now, and you can still see the grey underneath. Now it's worse in a couple of areas, but the problem I'm running into now is that because I'm applying so many coats, I'm sort of losing some of the detail on the fuselage and the wings, etc. So I don't know whether to cut my losses and not apply another coat and just put up with it. So what I think I'm going to do now is start assembling the various bits and pieces of the cockpit, leave the fuselage for the time being and just have a think about it while I'm assembling the cockpit, because in places I'm starting to apply the paint quite thick, and it started to look a little bit like it's been painted with a yard brush. It was quite smooth before, but I'm a bit worried that I have to apply that many coats of paint to sort of give it a solid colour, if you like, that I'll lose any detail that is on the mouldings. So anyway, let's get these bits and pieces off the sprues and start doing the cockpit. Okay, well, I've gone ahead and I've assembled the cockpit interior, and actually there's about 7 or 8 bits to this, and it's reasonably well detailed considering this is only like a little starter set. I've actually gone ahead and made the effort, and I've actually dry brushed most of the parts just to give it a bit of a more authentically worn look. There's 2 sets of decals that you have to apply to the instrument binnacles. I bet the camera won't pick it up there, but you can see them on the inside. I've also used a little cocktail stick. Where are we? There we go. And I've actually just dotted a few little blobs of red paint here and there, just to give the impression of perhaps some different coloured switches. But so far I'm reasonably impressed with this thing. If the interior is anything, the fit of the interior is anything to go by, hopefully the rest of the thing should fly together. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to start pulling the fuselage off the sprues, and according to the instructions there are several portions that we've got to attach to the inside of the fuselage first. I think you've got to do the landing gear as well. So anyway, we'll start doing that and we'll start getting this thing built. Now I've started to assemble the various bits and pieces that go on the inside and the outside of the fuselage halves, like there's a portion of the inside of the cockpit that doubles as the inlet trunking, and also we've got the actual inlet itself that sits on the outside. Now I've just run into my first real problem with this kit. Now once again I'm experiencing a little bit of paint stickiness because of using this gloss acrylic paint. If you remember the Provost video, it really didn't like being handled, and this is exactly the same. That's why I'm wearing sort of blue gloves here. Also on this I've had quite large portions of the paint peel off. Just like skin really. It hasn't adhered to the plastic of the actual model very well, and unfortunately you can probably see there where I've touched it to sort of sand the sprue marks off. It's literally come off, it's literally sort of peeled off in great big chunks. So I'm sort of regretting painting this thing on the sprues. I think in this case I should have left this till the fuselage and the wings etc were assembled and then painted it. Sort of regretting painting it on the sprues now. On the plus side though, the cockpit fits really nicely in this, and also the cockpit halves go together without any extra sanding, so that's a bonus. But you can see on here it's just sort of peeled off. Now ordinarily it won't be too much of an issue, but we've actually applied sort of 5, I'm sure a minimum of 5 coats to this because the yellow paint is so translucent, so it's going to be a bit of a pig to get rid of all these bits of paint that's sort of peeled off hopefully without making it look a complete mess. But I'm just waiting for these bits and pieces to dry with regards to the glue, and then we can move on to start the sort of inside of the wheel bay doors, wheel bays and wheel bay doors, etc. Now I'm at the stage where I've started to assemble the landing gear, and I tell you what, these have given me no end of grief. They're not a very good fit in the actual the wheel wells, if you like. They sort of locate on a little post, but the hole that they're designed to go in, it's nowhere near large enough, so you have to try and enlarge it in order to fit the little posts in for the landing gear. Now it won't be too bad, but the actual landing gear legs themselves have one of them is slightly mismolded, so it's sort of bent to one side. Now normally from past experience, and I haven't done many kits recently, granted, but I've always done the landing gear last where you can sort of get them level and straight-ish, and sort of eye them up before you actually put the wheels on, etc. But in this case, they've actually got to be fitted into the fuselage first, because they actually sit recessed in these little wells. So it has proved incredibly tricky, actually, and they're still not straight. So it basically means when I actually come to put the wheels on, etc., I know that this thing isn't going to sit on the wheels straight. It isn't going to sit level, if you like. You're going to have to do a lot of fannying around with it later on. So that has actually proved quite tricky. That has really tested my patience, that has, trying to put these things together. And then I can see now that they're not quite straight or level, so it's going to give me a bit of grief later on when I've actually managed to fit them in the fuselage halves. And when I've offered them up, they're not a very good fit in the fuselage halves either, so it's going to take a bit of playing around to get them to sort of sit right in there. But anyway, these things are set to try us, and sometimes if things are too easy, you don't learn anything, or you don't push yourself, etc. So that's the next job, is to fit these in the fuselage halves, and I think we might have to fit the nozzle in. I think we can then put the two halves together. So this is where we're at. I've jumped the gun slightly with this, and I've assembled the two halves of the fuselage. There's like the little bottom of the the bit of the fuselage that sits between the two landing gear recesses there. I've put the wing on, assembled the wing. That was an absolute pain in the backside, I'm not going to lie. That didn't fit onto the fuselage properly at all. I had some real sanding to get that to fit. In fact, the only bit that's really fitted without me having to do any sanding or cutting or trimming is the actual cockpit internals themselves. They fitted into the two halves of the fuselage like a dream. Everything else has put up a little bit of a fight, and unfortunately the landing gear aren't straight, so like that is going to cause me some grief further on down the road. And the other thing I'm slightly worried about is the instructions don't mention a nose weight at all, not that I can find anyway. But this thing seems to be a little bit tail heavy, so I thought it might. The reason why they hadn't mentioned a nose weight is perhaps it doesn't need one, but I've got a horrible feeling that it might well do, because it does like to sit on its tail. Obviously the front landing gear isn't on at the moment, but obviously we've got to put the control surfaces on at the rear, plus the exhaust nozzle, which will just make it heavier still. So I might see what it's like when all the landing gear is on, and we might just have to sort of wedge a little weight perhaps on the front seat or something, just to keep the nose down. But so far there are bits of this that I'm finding quite frustrating, actually, and if I was a novice, this would building this out of the box with just these bits and pieces, there are portions of this that would probably put me off for life. But anyway, we're going to persevere. We're not going to look at the underneath because that's a right mess. We're going to persevere with it, and I've got the front landing gear to assemble, the rear wheels and the exhaust nozzle and the rear control surfaces, and that's pretty much the fuselage done. And then we'll see if it still wants to sit on its arse, basically, and if it does, obviously we'll have to put a nose weight in. I do not like this acrylic yellow paint at all. It is a pain in the arse to work with. You have to touch it, it comes off. I really am regretting painting it on the sprues first. If you're going to buy one of these, I think my advice would be to assemble the fuselage and the internals first, and then go ahead and try and paint it, because you only have to touch it, and this just peels off like skin. So anyway, let's crack on. Let's see if we can't polish this turd a bit. And then all the wheels are on, exhaust nozzles in, the control surfaces at the rear are fitted. I did have to heavily sand down one of the main landing gear to get it to sit straight, because they were that far out when I did it. It sort of leant to one side. Thankfully it doesn't actually need a nose weight, it does sit quite nicely on the landing gear, so that's a bonus. I've painted the canopy. I've just got to wait for that to dry, put another coat on, put it on. I've just got a few patches to touch up on the landing gear where I've sanded bits and pieces down. I've also got to put the pitot tube or airspeed indicator tube on the front, and then we'll crack on with the transfers, and then it'll be pretty much done then, and then we'll have a bit of a review, and I'll tell you what I think. So the canopy's on, and it's not a brilliant fit, but we can probably do something with that. Might just blob some yellow paint around to try and hide the gap. We stuck the little airspeed indicator tube on, no issues there. Started putting the water transfers on. As ever on these Airfix kits, they always have a good quality, and they seem to go on nice. And to be honest, they make all the difference. They start to make it look like a proper little aeroplane. So we'll continue with that. There's a few areas that need to touch up. There's a few more transfers we need to put on, and then she's pretty much done. So there we have it, one little Folland Gnat. I've put the remainder of the transfers on. I've also put the 2 remaining antennae on the spine of the fuselage there, and touched various bits and pieces up. So that's pretty much it finished. Now then, what did we think of Airfix's 1-72 Folland Gnat starter kit? Well, let's have some good and bad points. Now then, we'll go for the bad points first. The elephant in the room is this yellow paint. I'm not a massive fan of this. It doesn't make the job very easy at all, especially on a starter kit. I can imagine if this was your first introduction to Airfix kits, and you got to build this, and the paint sort of stopped you from making a decent job of it. I can imagine it put you up for life. It was just so difficult to work with, and it didn't adhere to the plastic very well, and also it does, because I've had to put several coats on, well, more than several coats. It does look as though it's been applied with a yard brush, with the brush provided. So I'm not a massive fan of this gloss acrylic paint at all. Now the other bad point was the fit of some of the parts, and again, I can imagine if this was your introduction to an Airfix kit, it could well put you off the brand for life, especially compounded by the yellow paint. It does, in places, it does look quite rough. I mean, I've done the best I possibly could with it, but it does look a little bit Heath Robinson in places. So again, I think if this was your first kit or first introduction to Airfix kits, and you were just building it out of the box, this could put you off for life. Right, let's have some plus points. First of which was the price, $6.99. Cheap as chips. No, for £6.99, it's an absolute bargain. Even though I did have some issues with it with regards to fitting the paint, it's still worth every penny of that $6.99. Now, the other pro was, in fact, the subject matter of the kit itself. Now, I've never come across another model of a Folland Gnat, and to be able to build this classic British jet was, for me, the most interesting part. It's an excellent representation, albeit there's some bits are a bit rough and ready. But like I say, it's a classic British jet, and of quite an uncommon subject matter, I would imagine. Right then, crunch time. Would I recommend Airfix's Folland Gnat starter kit to anyone? And I'm going to say the answer is yes and no. No, if you are thinking of building this as a starter kit with just the contents of the box, because to be honest, they didn't give me the desired results, unfortunately. The paint is a pain in the backside to use, and the fit and finish of some of the parts, I would normally use some filler to tidy them up, but obviously in the kit you don't get that. So I wasn't 100% happy with the results, so as a starter kit I personally wouldn't bother. However, if you were buying this as a non-starter kit, if you like, and you were going to use all the proprietary filler and some decent paint, I would say yes, because the subject matter itself is that interesting. And I mean, you probably would end up with a decent looking little jet. As ever, if you found this video of some use and interest, please give it a big thumbs up, and if you're feeling that way inclined, hit that subscribe button for more similar future content. If you are thinking about making one of these kits or any other Airfix kit, don't forget to send your flying hours off to Models for Heroes. They can make a big difference in somebody else's life. And don't worry, if you are after more RC related content, there is more RC related content in the pipeline. I promise you I haven't abandoned RCs in any way, shape or form. It's just that these past few weeks it's just been a bit more convenient for me to do these types of videos for you guys. Anyway, once again guys, thanks for watching, and I will catch you again very soon.